Rick Dollar with NetRadioDogs.com, and we are with a gentleman tonight that has been around in this bluegrass world that we have for a lot of years, Mr. Doyle Lawson. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Rick, and you?
I'm honored to meet you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Honored to meet you
as well.
Yes, sir. And what we want to do tonight, Doyle, is we want to give everybody a look into the life of Doyle Lawson. You can start wherever you'd like. This is your interview, sir. But we want to give everybody what they want to see. Not just the glitz and the glamour of the world of performing,
right.
but what you do on a daily basis, or how things started out for you.
Today, I just got through playing golf all day.
And he didn't call me, so hey.
They said, how'd you do? I said, well, the course won.
Exactly. Well, how did you get into the bluegrass world?
Well, I was born here in the Tri-Cities area, just outside of Kingsport in Fordtown.
Right.
And we moved, my mother said we moved about 2 or 3 weeks after I was born over to another little suburb, a little area out Orbank. And my dad in those days, he did different jobs, but during World War II, he worked for the Holston Defense.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then in 1947, we moved over to Leatherwood, Kentucky.
Okay.
And I was about 3 years old, of course. And because Blue Diamond Coal Company was paying $19 a shift.
Wow.
That was a lot of money in 1947.
There you go.
And my dad said, well, we moved over there, and 2 weeks after we got there, they went on strike. We was like almost starved to death,
Yeah.
But we stayed there, and I actually went through the first year of school in Leatherwood, little coal camp. It's been reclaimed now. It's not there anymore.
Yeah.
But Livingston Elementary, I went through there. And then we moved back to Kingsport. And he went back to work for the Holston Defense because the Korean War came along. And then when it wound down, we moved to where he was from, in Hancock County.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
County seat being Sneeville.
Exactly.
And, but to go back to the original theme, we were like most other, or a lot of the other families. Radio was the venue, that was the entertainment.
Exactly.
And we listened to Grand Ole Opry on Saturday night. And I heard Bill Monroe. I was probably 5 years old or so. And there was just something about that music that grabbed me then. And it was different in a lot of ways. It just had, to me, it just really, and I was especially attracted to the mandolin. And but my mother, she told me who it was. She said, well, that's Bill Monroe. He plays the mandolin and he sings really high.
You know what? I think the whole world is happy that happened.
Well, I hope so. But maybe a few that we should have.
There's a lot of them, okay?
But Rick, I told her that night, I said, that's what I want to do when I grow up. And people think, oh, a 5-year-old, they don't know what they want to do.
Yeah, sometimes.
In a lot of cases, that's true. Because they want to do that for a day, and then they want to be president or
baseball player next week,
or they want to be whoever, And but I never wanted to do anything else.
Right.
Daddy, in 1950, we were still before we left the coal camps. My dad rededicated his life and got back in church. He was one of the few miners in that coal camp that had a car in those days. Because it wasn't too long after the war.
Yeah.
And he was one of them that had a car. So his friend that he worked with, he'd haul around, and on a Friday night they'd have a pretty good old time, I guess.
Yeah, I could imagine.
But in 1950, we came home, and we always said coming home to Kingsport.
Right.
And his first cousin talked him into going to a revival. And he didn't want to go, my mother told me. Well, we stayed there. They had two kids that were a little bit older than I was.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, he went to that revival, he and my mother, and the next morning when I woke up, there was a world of difference in my dad's.
Big change.
Yeah, and I didn't know what it was, but I knew something had happened, you know.
Right.
But anyway, from that day on, he stayed in church, and my daddy was a good singer. He didn't play anything,
Mhm.
but he had a good voice. And the first time I guess I became aware of that, I'm going way back. You said you want to go back? I'm going way back.
Hey, this is your night,
Between
sir.
Leatherwood and Hazard, Kentucky,
Right.
there used to be a stream of some sort. I don't remember what it was, what creek it was, or what it was. But they'd go over there on a good day, and they'd pull out in the middle of that creek and wash the cars.
Right.
And I can remember the first song that I heard my daddy sing, and it was Sweeter Than the Flowers. And it was a song that Irvin Rouse, who wrote the Orange Blossom Special,
Right.
he had written that as well. I didn't know any of that then, but I can remember hearing Daddy sing that, and then I remember him saying, I sure do miss Mother, because she had died about a month after I was born, in
Oh,
44.
man.
Well, this would have been 4 or 5 years later, 4 years or so
Right.
later, you know. So, you know, the hurt and the missing is still there.
Oh, yeah, I
Pretty
can
much, and
imagine.
I know that for a
Right.
fact, you know. But anyway, but he got back into church. He started leading the congregation in singing. Then he and my mother and one of his nephews, while we were still here in Kingsport, sang a little bit. And then mother stopped, and my brother and I were real small. And he was 2.5 years younger than me. So she kind of took care of us, and her health was up and down in those days. My sister, who's 4 years older than me, sang with him until she got married. And of course, we moved in 54. We moved to Hancock County.
Uh-huh.
And that's when it kind of evolved into a quartet by then. And Willis Bird was the man that sang with my dad, and I heard that he had a mandolin. So I asked my daddy, I said, would you see if I could borrow that? I want to learn to play. Well, he did, and Willis said, yeah. So one Saturday night, we were in a revival at Frost Missionary Baptist Church, where we went to church. And he brought that mandolin. So I took it to the car, and it started raining. So I used the rain as an excuse not to go into church.
That's a good one. I hadn't thought about that.
It wasn't so good.
Yeah, well, probably not.
But I had, the time that the church was over, I kind of picked me out a little melody that I could play on it with that
Wow.
mandolin, and it was not hard, but I thought it was then, you know.
Yeah.
But that really didn't make my daddy all that happy. He
No,
said,
probably not.
the next time it's time for church, you be in there.
That's right.
Daddy didn't talk a lot, but his words carried a lot of weight.
I understand that. Yeah, my dad's
So
the same
I
way.
began to try to learn to play the mandolin when I was
Yeah.
about 11 years old. And I'm self-taught. There was not a lot of people around there at that time that played music. We lived out on a farm out in some probably 5 miles or so out of Sneedville. In 1958, there was a fellow named Ron Campbell who had married Jimmy Martin's half-sister.
Oh, my gosh.
They lived on the farm next to ours. And he kind
What
of...
a neighborhood.
Oh, yes. He took an interest in saw that I was learning to play mandolin. I was doing pretty good. I had tried to work it out myself, you know.
Yeah.
And he said, of course, he knew I was a big fan of, I had discovered Jimmy Martin and the Osborne Brothers, and I thought that was the prettiest harmony that I had
Yeah.
heard, you know. Because they had a song called 20/20 Vision and Walking Around Blind, and I thought, that's just about the best singing I've ever heard. And it was good.
Wow.
Well, by then, Jimmy had moved on. It was 1958, and he and the Osbornes split in 55, and they went separate ways, and
Right.
the rest of that is history. They both, the Osbornes and Jimmy did
Done very well, yeah.
but it was a great combination, I got to tell you. But he said, Ron said, Jimmy's coming home for Christmas. Would you like to go meet him? And I said, oh, would I? You know?
Yeah,
Well,
really.
gosh, this was probably in October or so, and I could not, I thought Christmas would never get here. You know? But I got to go over, and he was not there when we got there, but he came in a little later, and you may think this is crazy, but I remember that he came in, and his mother, Sarah, said, "Are you hungry?" He said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "I got a headache." Why would I remember that? I don't know, but there was one of my heroes.
Exactly.
Well, he went in and he ate. I'm just sitting there. He came out. He said, "Ron tells you play a little mandolin." I said, "Well, I'm trying." And so he sat down and we started picking. And so he thought that I was struggling. I couldn't play fast because I didn't know how to use my wrist.
Right.
And he said, "Well, let me show you something." He said, "You're playing with a stiff arm." He said, "You got to play with your wrist. You play from here, right here, out to the tip of your fingers."
Right.
And he said, "I learned this from Bill." That was a magic word for me because he went to work for Bill Mungo in 1949. You know.
Oh,
He said, "I
man.
learned this from Bill, and I'm going to show it to you." And he did. And he said, "Two things I want you to do when you go home." He said, "I want you to practice your tremolo, and don't worry about playing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry about it. Just practice that over and over. Do it for 2 or 3 weeks." And he said, "When you play, keep your fingers close to the fingerboard, and you won't be late. You won't play behind.
Right.
You won't get behind." And so I did that a couple of 3 weeks. And so I decided, well, I'll see how it works.
Yeah.
And so I started then. I started playing, and I was amazed about the difference, in my speed, and to this day, that's the only way I can play. I can't play any other way than what he showed me. And
Man, you're shocking me. I mean, you're pulling some names out of the hat that I'm just.
well,
Now it makes sense how you know how to play the way you do.
well, I had a good, he kind of mentored me because I was 14.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't, so I decided after that, I played for a while, and I had 2 cousins that we started doing a little trio, and we just had a guitar and a mandolin and with the trio. And Kermit Lawson was my first cousin, Wiley Joe Sizemore was the 3rd cousin. And but we had a pretty good trio. My mother, she said, "Well, you all are the country cousins." So we became the country cousins. And but that kind of evolved into to a 4 or 5 piece band sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Went to school with a fellow who was a little older than me. I think he was maybe a junior when I was a freshman. He Woodrow Johnson. He had a good bass voice.
Mm-hmm.
So we wound up Woodrow, and then Norman Jarvis was another fellow, a little older than I was, but and he was older. He had just recently married. He actually had a job in the car, so that was a pretty good thing to have.
Kind of works out for you
We had
guys,
some
don't
wheels. I didn't even have
Hey,
a
we got
driver's
some
license.
wheels now, man. Here we go.
But anyway, so we played around and thought we were pretty good. We actually were pretty decent to not know what we were doing,
Yeah.
But Jimmy would come home and a couple more times I decided that we needed a banjo because we had 2 guitars, a mandolin, and actually had 3 guitars. So I thought, I'll learn to play banjo.
Yeah.
Then I got to thinking about, by then, that, I wanted to go to Nashville when I got old enough, or I wanted to go somewhere and get a job with a band. And I loved Jimmy's music. By then I knew that J.D. Crowe had blazed the trail for the banjo style that
Right.
Jimmy liked.
That's true.
And Paul Williams had married Jimmy's sister, and Paul was a great mandolin player, and just he and Jimmy were bonded, and they were joined at the hip almost. They sang so close together.
Yeah.
And so I kind of looked at my options and thought, well, Bill's a mandolin player, Bob Osborne's a mandolin player, Jimmy's got Paul, Jesse McCrimmon plays the mandolin, Don Reno's boy Ronnie plays the mandolin, Lester and Earl don't carry one now, neither does Ralph and Carter, so I think if I learn to play banjo, I might get a job.
be all right.
Be a little easier, So
Wow.
with that, plus the fact that I wanted to have a banjo in that little group that we had.
Right.
And
Just the right place at the right time.
Right place at the right time. So I set about learning to play the banjo. And again, I'm just having to work it out, what I heard in my head. I didn't know a thing about banjo other than it had a resonator and 5 strings, and you played it with 2 picks on your fingers and 1 on your thumb. That's all I knew about the banjo, you know. And so I figured out, and I thought I'd never get that roll, get that 3rd finger or this finger to work.
Right.
I mean, that was pretty easy, but the other, so I kept on, and it finally began to come around, and by nature, my hand, it felt right, you know. I didn't know what I was doing, but it felt like that's where it ought to be. But so Jimmy called in 1960, late 1960, and Ron had told him that I was playing banjo, and he called, and Ron called my parents and said Jimmy would like for Doyle to come to Nashville. They said, no way. He's only 16 years old. That's right. No way. And so, I didn't know even about that for a while, but he told Ron, said, well, tell that boy to keep playing the banjo. I might need him sometime. So a couple of years later, I got a call. When I got out of school in '62, I went to Morristown and went to work in a furniture factory.
Right.
I will tell you though that the Country Cousins got pretty famous in 3 or 4 counties there for a while.
Sometimes that's enough, you know?
There was a radio station. I wish I could remember the call letters in Pennington Gap,
Right.
Virginia. A guy named Roy Sprinkles had a radio. He sponsored 2 hours of gospel music on Sunday afternoon.
Right.
He had a used furniture store, and he would sponsor the music, advertise his furniture. And so we decided to go over and see if we could get on and play a song or two. And it wasn't that hard in those days, you know.
Yeah.
Of course, the world of radio is totally different.
Totally different than it is now,
Yeah,
yeah.
so-
My goodness.
So we go over, and yeah, we put you on. And so we go on and we do a couple of songs. I don't remember what it was, but it was obviously gospel. But we did a lot of the Stanley Brothers style and Flat and Scrubs and
Right.
that type of gospel. And so 2 or 3 weeks later or so, we decided, well, maybe he'll let us pick again if we go over there.
Yeah, never
So we pull up in the driveway, and it's a true story, pull up, and he comes out of the studio. He's not a real tall man, but he was a real big,
stocky
guy,
fellow.
you know. And he come out the door and he said, where in the world have y'all been? we looked, we said, well, we've been home.
Yeah, exactly.
He said, well, I didn't know you didn't tell me who you were, didn't know where you came from, you never told me what you called yourself. He said, come in here. So we went in, and in that control room, there was a big, not quite a big galvanized tub, but a big tub.
Right.
And it was full of cards, people writing in, wanting to know who we were.
There you go.
So we went away from that thinking we probably already hit the big time, you know.
Yeah. My goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, when you get that kind of thing happening, you know.
Yeah.
and
Well,
that,
anyway, it was fun. We enjoyed it. It was all live, you know.
Well, yeah.
But we got a lot of mail.
Sometimes I think that's the way it ought to be. You know?
I agree. I really do.
I'd rather hear that. I'd rather hear it live than I would. And I have to quote Carl Jackson on this one. He said, it's more magical when you do it right the first time and then you keep doing it right. But when when you got all these computers and everything, and nothing against production or anything like that, because God knows we use it.
It all has its place.
Exactly.
But that's changed for the better for me. You know.
Right.
We'll get to that. But anyway, in February of 1963, I got a call from Jimmy. I was living in Morristown with my sister, and I just had lost my job and didn't know what I was going to do. And I got a call that it was on a Friday night. and it was Jimmy. He said, Ron, tell me, you still playing the banjo? I said, yeah. He said, well, do you know any of my songs? I said, I know all of them. He said, really? I said, yeah. He said, do you sing? I said, baritone, whatever you want. And so he said, well, you want to come down and try out? I said, yeah. So I hopped on a Trailways bus the next day. I got into Nashville about 3 o'clock on Sunday morning on the 3rd day of February. And I called out to his house, and Barbara said, well, he's not here, but he knows you're coming in. So when he calls in, said he and Billy Edwards are out. And Billy was the banjo player leaving. Great, He was a great guy. He was moving back to High Point, North Carolina, and a good banjo maker, good guy, funny. But he said, she said, when he comes in, or when he calls in, I'll tell him to come get you. So I'm sitting there in the bus station thinking, man, what are we going to do if he doesn't show up? 'Cause,
Yeah.
I don't have bus fare back to Morristown. All I had, my little tote bag, my banjo, and me, you know.
And you know what? That's all you needed.
Well, he came in and he said, well, got in the back. I got in the back seat and Billy was driving. Jimmy said, well, get your banjo out. I said, here? He said, well, yeah. So I got it and he said, play Cripple Creek. And I played Cripple. He said, you're hired. I said, well, that's pretty easy.
Oh, my goodness.
I thought that was, and I thought it was really easy until the rehearsal started.
Yeah.
And then it was very intense. And, you know, I was a real young kid. And I didn't know a thing about a banjo. And you know, it was all new to me. And plus, I'm in the presence of one of my heroes.
That's right.
And Jimmy was, he was at the top of his game, having hit records, and had a lot of pressure on him. You know, when you get up, when you rise in the stature and popularity, the hardest part about getting there is staying when you get there.
Right.
And that's really difficult.
And I've heard that from a lot of musicians.
You've got to keep the stuff going, and so. But he hired me anyway, and so we're in about the 3rd day of rehearsal, and he stopped. He said, let me see your forward roll. And I said, what is a forward roll? He said, you don't know what a roll? I said, Jimmy, I'm just playing what I hear in my head, how I heard the records, I listened to the record,
right.
And I'm trying to duplicate that. I said, I don't know anything about it. And he said, Billy, show him what the forward roll is. And Billy said, why, it's easy, and he did. And, I mean, it's like then the light turned.
It just clicked in your head.
And it all made sense. I realized that the banjo centers around that right hand.
Exactly.
What you do with it. You know?
And it's
the left hand is really not all that complicated, but
No,
what you do with that roll, reverse it, forward, and you know all the stuff that you can do with your right hand, and it started to make it all begin to add up. Then you know, so that was the start of my career. From the 3rd day of February, that's coming up on 53 years. So.
I was getting ready to say, that's right around the corner.
Right around the corner,
you know?
yeah.
Well, let's fast forward a little while, a little further through, say up into the, when you started doing your own thing. I mean, you were sitting in a pretty good position at that point.
I was, you know, I left Jimmy in the fall, in the late summer, '63, and I wound up in Louisville, Kentucky. Because I didn't want to stay, no offense to Morristown, but back in those days, you know, primarily you either worked in a furniture factory,
right.
And that's about it. You
that's
know?
It.
And I didn't want to do that. I just knew that that's not what
you needed to do.
So I wound up in Louisville, and I played in square dances, for square dances, and for do union jobs, and I taught some. And I had a student that was taking banjo lessons from me that also was taking lessons from J.D. Crowe in Lexington.
Oh, wow.
So he told J.D. about me, that I'd worked for Jimmy. Well, J.D. Crowe didn't know who I was, because
right.
I really didn't stay long enough to create any kind of waves, you know, as far as banjo picking. But he said, well, tell him to come down, I'd like to meet him, you know. Well, that went on, and so finally in about the middle part of '66, I decided I'd go down and look him up. And I did. And he was playing a little place called Martin's Tavern. And we immediately just hit it off like we'd known each other for years.
Right.
I set him playing guitar that night. And so that was in the late May. And if I wasn't doing a square dance or something on a Saturday, a lot of times I'd just go down and just to set it in. Sometimes I played guitar. Sometimes I didn't do anything other than visit.
Right.
But he called up in early December. His guitar player was laid up with hepatitis, so I had to take off. And he said, "Would you fill in till he gets back on his feet?" I said, "All right, sure." Well, that fill-in lasted till August 29th, 1971. And I got a call to go to the Country Gentleman over in D.C.
Who?
The Country Gentleman.
Just kidding.
Yeah. They were cutting a pretty wide
Yeah.
swath in those days.
I would think so.
It was a real opportunity. I mean, Crow and I were real close. We still are.
Right.
Crow's like, and JD's like a brother to me, and we've been associated musically. I mean, I left his band in '71, but we never did really quit picking together,
Well, that's good. I mean, that's
Yeah.
sometimes that's the best way to communicate,
Yeah,
with somebody
well,
that you know.
So I went over to the gentleman, and they made me a sweet offer, so I stayed there 7.5 years. During that stay, I got to where I was producing and mixing the recording, getting the material, and pretty much handling the band personnel and things like that.
Wow.
And, Bill Yates was the other partner, and his duties were the road. He knew that when we had to leave, how long it would take there, whatever. When he said we leave at 2 o'clock, he didn't question it, because that's what we did.
That was his job.
And Charlie was the banker, so to speak. He'd go collect the money when we get through the concerts, unless it was a bad risk, and then he would send me or Bill one.
Get it ahead of time.
And when it was really bad, he'd send Bill, but we knew we'd get it with Bill. Bill could be your best friend or worst enemy.
Yeah, I understand. I know a couple guys like
He was a great guy. We lost Bill earlier this year.
Right.
But anyway, but I stayed 7.5 years, and so I began to look at where I was. I was 34 years old, and I'd spent the 16 years with Jimmy, JD, and the gentleman. With Jimmy, you stepped in where the style was already there. With JD, we had more freedom because we both liked to do things off the wall,
That's right.
And JD is very open-minded about music, and well, the gentlemen were too, but their style was pretty much there, and my job was, when I went wherever I went, was to adapt.
Right.
Their job was not to adapt for me. I was to change for them, and that's what I did. But I thought I'd like to see from the ground up what I could do if I just stepped away and started over.
Yeah.
It took a while for me to do that, because I thought a lot of Charlie Waller and Bill Yates,
Yeah.
those guys. We had a lot of years together, but there was something that I wanted to do, some things I wanted to do that I knew wasn't possible there.
Right.
And
Right.
plus the fact that I always knew that if I didn't do this, I would look back when I got, well, say the age I am now, and say,
What if?
what if? You
That's
should have
right.
gone for it. You were chicken, or you didn't. And
Exactly. I mean, I
stepped away from the
understand.
challenge.
That stepping away part, though, that's
It was hard because
that's the
number
whole
one,
key
the
to it.
friendship thing,
Right.
and number two, in those days, the Country Gentleman that's like working with an institution.
Exactly.
It's a good spot to be
Everybody
in.
knew what was going on.
So, but I made that decision, and I got to tell you, I was really apprehensive, because, when you do that, the promoters and the people,
Mm-hmm.
what you did before means nothing to them.
No,
What are you
it's
doing?
a whole different
What are you
ball
doing
game.
now?
That's right.
And so I knew that it could go either way.
That's right.
But I was really, really fortunate. I called a year or so before I left. I'd produced one half of an album for a band called Southbound.
Mhm.
They were working out of Greenville, South Carolina. It was Jimmy
Right.
Haley and Louis Purtle, and I forgot the other two boys' name at that time. But so the first thing I thought of when I decided that I would look for people, I wanted to have a good, strong rhythm guitar player.
Yeah.
And the first guy I thought of was Jimmy Haley.
Mhm.
I mean, he was and still is one of the most powerful rhythm guitar players I've ever been around. You know? And so I called him. I still had his number, and told him what I was looking to do. And he, yeah, I'd be interested. Well, so I said, what about Lewis? Now that was before he became Lou Reed, you know. So what about Lewis? What's he doing? He said, well, you know, he's really not doing much picking these days, but he might be. And I said, well, while I'm talking to you, you know, any banjo pickers are loose hanging around. He said, how about Terry Balkin? So he's been picking with us. He lives up in Monroe, North Carolina. So I made one phone call and basically got the first three guys that came here. That was Terry and Jimmy and Lewis, who became. The reason Lou started calling himself Lou Reed, nobody could pronounce his last name. Pyrtle, Pyrtle, and they butchered it every time.
I bet.
And so we got to talking. I said, well, let's find some. What's your middle name? He said, Reed. I said, well, somebody said, well, how about Lou Reed?
Yeah.
You know.
Nothing wrong with that.
And so it was easier for people to remember. You know, Lou certainly didn't do it out of embarrassment for his last name.
Oh, no.
It wasn't that at all. But I mean, they called him Priddle, Pradle, Pryor. They called him everything, you know. But anyway, that was the initial three guys that came in, and we rehearsed. Our rehearsals, the first little while, was 12 to 18 hours a day.
Wow.
I told him, I said, look, here.
How'd that go?
Oh man, we were hungry, we wanted it, you know.
That's good.
And I outlined, I said, here's what I want. I want a band. I said, I don't want a one-dimensional band. I don't want to be a band that can only do one thing because that's what you started doing, and people won't let you do anything, or that's what they want you to do and nothing else. I said, I want to do hard driving bluegrass if I want it. If I want to do contemporary, if I want to do whatever I want to do. I said, but above all, I want to have a quartet like my dad had when I was growing up, and that was what we used. And let me tell you, Rick, in the early days, we threw everything at the people except the door, and see, whatever stood we kept, and what they didn't like, we'd get rid of it.
That's it. Well, but that's that's what it takes. I mean, the good thing is you got to do what you wanted to do. You know, there was no other question about it.
It was a freedom, and not that I didn't have a lot of freedom where I had been, but this was a new kind of freedom.
That's right.
This was, I was a partner with the country gentleman, and as you know, partners, sometimes you win a vote, sometimes you lose.
Yeah, you give and take.
And I never liked that losing part.
Yeah, me either. Anyway, that's not what I'm looking to do.
And so somebody asked me once, they said, well, why did you ever want to have your own group and be the leader? I said, well, I always liked to be the one that said, get in the boat, men, rather than the one to say, where do you want me to sit?
That's right.
I like the one that said, get over here.
Where did the name Quicksilver come from? That's
my mother.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the early days, when I left the group, the country gentleman, there still is, if you remember the series, the Foxfire books,
right,
that came out of North Georgia,
exactly,
Raven Gap, down that area.
Right.
It's about the heritage of North Georgia and the Appalachian region in general. I mean, a lot of stuff they wrote about I was very familiar with, because in Hancock County back in those days, a lot of people stuck to the old traditional ways.
That's right.
And there certainly nothing wrong with that at all.
No, because I think some days we should be there.
There's a lot of value in that I learned and kept with me. But I felt a kinship to those books because of the the heritage, that the preservation of it, you know, that they had in the books where you could always read about it.
Right.
And that's one reason I always appreciated John Rice Irwin at the Museum of the Appalachian. You know.
Right.
Now, John's health has failed him some now, but his family has picked up the torch and they're carrying on with it. And
That's great.
a lot of for the same reasons, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, the Foxfire thing. So this was before you could Google this and internet that and whatever. So you had to try to.
Well, I have to do that some days because there's just some stuff I don't know.
Well, I know what I'm saying. In those days, you had to do the best research you could.
That's right.
And so what I wanted to do is make sure nobody else was using the name Foxfire.
Yeah,
I found nobody at that time. Well, boy, when I left the gentleman, it was like a range fire. You know, the word spread. You know, I'd left the gentleman, and somebody told me that Willie Nelson said. A guy named Joe Leach knew Willie. And he said, you know, you heard Doyle Lawson quit the gentleman? I said, why? I said, well, he wanted to have his own band. He said, well, he's running the band anyway. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Willie usually tells the truth, you know, where people want to hear it or not. So.
Well, I like a man that does that.
I do too.
I like a man that says what he means and means what he says.
That's exactly right.
But anyway, immediately though, I got some people that wrote me letters and some few calls. Well, I thought this is not good.
Yeah.
Well, it was basically regional groups that were not a nationally touring group.
Yeah.
But I guess the thing that really solidified the idea was the fact that this lady called me and she was literally in tears. She's from Kansas or something.
Yeah.
She said, we've been using that name for 6 years. And I said, lady, let me tell you something. Do you feel it? Go right ahead and use that. I said, because the last thing I want to do is to be mistaken for somebody else.
That's right.
Use it.
You got to do your thing.
I'll find something else.
That's right.
About that time, now we had done a few shows with Doyle Lawson and Foxfire. And I even gone to Canada using it, but it was real short-lived. I was home in Kingsport when my parents were still living, and my mother was always in the kitchen. And the first thing when you walked in, when she didn't say hi, she'd say, well, what do you want to eat?
That's right. Man, I've heard that 100 times from my grandmother, I'm telling you, and I never once turned her down either.
No, what I'd say, Mama, just fix me a big pan of your cornbread.
Yeah.
And, oh, son, I'm telling you.
Lord.
But anyway, we're sitting at the table drinking good coffee, and I said, Mom, I need a name for my band. I said, I want something that's easy to remember, but I don't want a Mountain Boy, I don't want a Review, I don't want a Valley or anything like that. I want something different. Right. Because in those days there was a lot of Reviews and there was a lot of Valleys and Mountain Boys and River Playboys or whatever. And I said, I don't want anything like that.
The way things were back then.
So we were tossing things back and forth, you know. And she said, you know, Quicksilver is a good name. I said, well, I'd heard of Quicksilver. You know? Yeah. And I said, yeah. She said, well, now, a common definition sometimes used for that is that it's a force, and it's a force to be reckoned with, and that it's kind of unstoppable. Well, that rang a bell.
There you go.
And I thought, well, you know, that's really what I told her. I said, well, I hope that some way, I said, I hope I'm able to carve me out a little niche in this music and make a place for what I want to do. Right. And so I was living in Concord, Virginia at that time, between Lynchburg and Appomattox. Right. And so I rolled that around all the way back. It took about 3.5+ hours to get up there. And when I got back, well, Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver sounded right. And
it does.
36 years later, it still sounds all right.
It does. It sounds great. Well, I want to tell you something. We want to know the real Doyle Lawson, and I've got few questions for you.
All right.
First of all, I want to know what it was like to work with Carl on Orthophonic Joy. That record is, if you've heard of the success, I mean, there's a lot of Grammy nominations and a lot of stuff flying around.
Included in some of that, you know.
Yeah, exactly. That's another good reason for you to be here.
Carl Jackson is one of my dearest friends.
He's a good man.
We all know how talented he is.
Yes, he is.
And I remember when Carl first came on the scene, he was playing banjo for Jim and Jesse. He was about 14, 15 years old.
That's right.
And so he could play Orange Blossom Special faster than Speed, you know. I mean, he would wear that thing out, you know. But he's just such a genuine person.
He is.
And his mom was deceased, but Ruby was just the sweetest lady you would ever want to meet, and boy, she could do some cooking too. And of course, Lee, his dad.
How come it all goes back to cooking?
Oh well, you know, I'm a country boy.
Yeah, I understand. Don't worry.
But Lee, his dad, is Carl's biggest fan. You know,
Yeah.
and let me tell you, Lee has brought me. He brought me the Little Mountain Church House song.
Wow.
And then he brought me "Oh Heart, Look What You've Done." So a few years back, he brought me a song. He said, "Here's one Carl said you need to hear." He said, "No." He said, "Here's one you need to hear." Carl don't know I'm giving it to you.
Uh-oh.
Well, it was called "Calling All Her Children Home." It's about the South, you know.
Right.
And I've recorded all of them, and plus others that Carl has written. The best is yet to come.
Right.
But he's a great, in addition to being a musician and vocalist, he has a great, incredible ear about production.
Yes, he
and
does.
About studio, about mixing. I mean, he's the whole package.
He is.
And
He is.
so I first worked with Carl on the Mark Twain
Right.
thing.
We're familiar with
Yeah,
that.
and then he called me up. He said, "Hey," he said, "we're going to do this thing. The city or the states of Virginia and Tennessee are getting behind this, and we're going to do this about the 1927 recordings." He said, "And here's a song." He said, "There's only one group that can do this, and that's you." And so. He said, "Have you ever heard a song called 'I'm Redeemed'?" And I said, "I'm redeemed." My dad used to sing that. You know. But anyway, so that's we actually recorded that song in my dobro player studio,
Really?
and just sent it to Carl.
He said it was a one-shot deal, too.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was, if you get to listen to that song, I mean, everybody's got Orthophonic Joy, but when you need to hear that, because there's things in there that, I don't know how to put it, that you can't fabricate. There's things there that you could tell it was a one-shot deal because it's just perfect.
Well, see, the thing about the beauty about the whole thing is Carl has this incredible, uncanny knack for knowing the right people for that particular piece of music.
He does.
And there's an art to that, you know. 'Cause
Yeah.
let me tell you, I learned early on as a musician, as a vocalist, and as a band leader, you don't ever touch a song that doesn't fit you.
Right.
If it's like wearing a good boot, if it feels good, you can wear it. If it don't,
That's right.
You won't get too far with it, you know.
You won't have it long, will you?
But he has a way of knowing who was right for
Yeah,
piece of
he
material.
really did. That's a masterpiece right there, I'm telling you.
It was great fun because the other, the film thing we did over at Carter Fold.
Right.
Again, we just got up
Just had fun.
and sang and had fun with it, you know. Of course, I grew up with that kind of music.
Yeah.
Acapella, Daddy sang acapella quartet music for
I'll tell you what,
years upon years.
buddy, it's like walking into an ice box when you hear that song, because I'm going to tell you, it starts at the back of my legs and goes up my spine. I mean, that's a great song.
Well, and of course, he got Eddie Stubbs to narrate.
Yeah.
What a
That was a good idea.
And of course, he just has a way getting people to do these things, you know, and when they
Made
do
it work.
you know, you just don't, sometimes you think, really?
How does he do
Glad
that?
pays me?
Yeah.
But listen to it. It's
I know,
great.
it's ridiculously
It's great.
crazy,
Yeah.
but every bit of it works, and it all works in the way that it's supposed to. I mean,
Well,
it just,
I know that now, the first thing we did in the studio, we went to the studio and did for Carl on the Mark Twain thing.
right,
But another thing too is that Carl knows what he wants, and he won't settle for
no,
half that,
that's right.
or he won't settle for three quarters that.
I
He
mean-
won't settle for almost there. He wants it there.
He wants it all.
And I really respect and appreciate a man like that, because
Well,
that's how I am.
you have to admire somebody that's, has that kind of commitment to what they're doing. They don't want to halfway do it, because like you were saying earlier, when you put your name out there and your reputation on the line, people expect certain
Well,
things.
Rick,
from
this Orthophonic Joy is such a part of history revisited.
is.
You know, it's a wonderful thing to finally see the recognition that this area here in the Tri-Cities
Right,
played in the formation of
man,
country music as a commercial music.
it's amazing.
Now, we all know that there was records made before then,
Oh,
before
yeah.
1927. No disputing that. You know?
No,
But the reality of the whole thing is that it actually grew into a commercial successful music
right,
based on these recordings here in 1927.
that's it.
Because, you know, Jimmy Rogers went on to be a superstar, and on the opposite end of the spectrum, playing that real earthy, down the mountain music was A.P., Sarah, and Maybelle.
That's
And,
right.
you know, Jimmy's playing a real blues-influenced country music with his yodel, and they're
Right.
doing something quite the opposite.
And that Doyle Lawson guy,
Oh, yeah, somewhere they let him creep in here.
I'm gonna tell you what, Doyle, it's just been a joy sitting down here talking to you, and I'll just be honest with you, I was as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs
no.
coming over here, as my granddaddy would say. But I think I've met a guy that just understands things a lot like I do. So
Well, hey,
you
you know, I am blessed, Rick.
we all are. I'm telling
You know,
you.
when I look back, a little kid from East Tennessee, all I ever wanted to do really was just to be on stage with a band picking.
Right.
I'd go to sleep at night before I got old enough to leave home. Before all I dreamed about was being on stage, and I would sleep with a band on stage every night.
That's it.
They were nameless and faceless, but I knew
But you were there.
that's what I wanted to do.
That's it.
And I got to tell you, I would be lying to you if I didn't tell you there'd been some valleys and some
Well, sure.
low places in it along the way, but I don't know of an occupation or profession that anybody can get in where that's trouble-free. I mean, if this was a trouble-free world, there'd be no reason to want to go to heaven.
Exactly.
But
Well,
this
golfing.
is not.
Golfing. Would you want to ever be a professional golfer?
No. No.
I didn't think so.
No.
Me either.
Well, see, then I would not have an excuse.
I'd have a lot of broken
I
clubs in my bag, probably.
I don't, listen, I love to play golf. I've never thrown a club.
Wow.
I don't cuss the club.
Yeah.
The club had nothing to do with it.
No, it
You
don't.
know?
Normally, it's how we
If
swing
I,
it.
if I lose a ball, you know, they'll say, well, that's nice. I said, I don't want that ball. If I want that ball,
I got another one right
I
over
should
here.
hit it better. You know? So I'll give myself maybe 2 minutes or 3 to look at the ball, and
That's
if
it.
it's not there, I say, well, I should have hit it better.
Yeah,
But-
that's all right.
But I'm a professional musician. I'm an amateur golfer at best.
And you're a heck of a guy.
And well, I'm just a person. I've been blessed to do what I do, and I'll never forget the words that country artist Joe Stampley.
Mm-hmm.
Joe and Bo Bandy did some stuff.
Right,
Well, Joe
yeah.
had some hits before that, and as well as Bo did too.
Yeah.
We were playing, and I was still with the gentleman. We played in Alexandria, Virginia, and there's a big package show. Well, we had Ernest Tubb was one of the headliners.
Wow.
And I forgot who see, Ernest was on there, maybe, I don't know if Lord, anyway, it was a pretty good sized package.
Yeah.
Well, it was down to who was gonna open the show. I mean, when you opened the show, it meant that you were probably the least on the totem pole. And so they came in, the promoter came in, they said, and Joe was standing there talking, and they said, well, said, we got it, because the gentlemen were pretty, they pretty much owned that D.C. area.
Yeah.
I said, I got a problem. He said, I hate to ask, but would one of you all be willing to open the show? And the other one, and Joe looked at him back, he said, well, I don't care. He said, ain't no stars in my band. Stars hangs in the sky. He said, you tell me when you want me to go on. I never forgot
There
that.
you go.
I never forgot that.
Man
So,
alive.
They tell me, well, do you mind if so close the show? No, just give me a turn. That's all I want.
That's right.
Let me have my turn.
Just let me show them what I can do.
I don't need to go on last. And actually, I'd rather not go on last. I like to go ahead and get it over with.
That's right.
Try to put the pressure on the other guy.
That's right. Now, see if you can do better than that. Well, Doyle, I'm gonna tell you something,
Like
buddy.
Buck Owens and George Jones.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say Buck Owens.
George told me that, and Buck, I heard Buck tell about that they both had hit records. They're doing this co-build on these shows, and one night there's always arguing about who's going to close the show.
Yeah.
Buck said, now, George, I've got the last number one. I ought to do it. George, no, I've had more hits than you have. Anyway, so George said, all right. So he told Buck, he said, you go ahead. He said, you closed. And tomorrow night, you'll be sorry. And Buck said he went out there and he said, George, he said he did every song I ever recorded. Then he come off stage, Buck said, he looked at him and says, your turn.
Oh my gosh. Man alive. Well, I tell you what, we've enjoyed talking to you, and I appreciate you so much for taking time out and allowing us to come into Cold Springs Church.
Yeah, I've been going to church here for 31 years.
Well, and I mean, everybody has their place in life that they're more comfortable at than anywhere, and I'm glad you picked this place.
Well, I used to do quite a number of church things on a Sunday when I was out on the road, but
Right.
I decided, my wife and I talked about it, and if I didn't really have a big thing that I had to do on Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
if I could get back home, I could come home and
Go
to
church.
my home church.
That's right.
I rededicated my life in 1985, and I joined this church.
Right.
I grew up in a missionary Baptist church, but this is a Presbyterian. But
Right.
I don't really think too much about whether you're a
Guidelines.
Presbyterian or a
Yeah, I don't
missionary
either.
Baptist. My only hope is I can just keep myself in line and be pleasing in God's eyes.
That's it.
Because I've not found any Presbyterians or Catholic or missionaries or free will or whatever in the Bible. It's not there.
I've never seen it either.
The gospel's there though.
That's right.
The word and the guideline and the roadmap is in that book.
That's right.
So
Exactly
keep your house in order. Keep your house in order. Let everything else work itself out.
Yeah, even your golf game.
Well, it never happened. My problem is I don't ever know which door is going to show up.
Don't worry about it. I know exactly how you feel. Well, I'll tell you what, folks, we've had a great night with the one and only Doyle Lawson. I'll tell you what. So, Rick Dollar and Tony Dean for NetRadioDogs.com. We are with the man, Mr. Doyle Lawson.
Been a pleasure, Rick.
Yes, sir. Thank you.